Everyone thinks family will always respect you, but what happens when the very people you'd give your life for mock you in front of strangers? I wore grease-stained hands for years in service to my country, fixing the engines that carried soldiers into war zones and brought them safely home. I was proud of my work, proud of the calluses and the sweat. It was honest, loyal, and life-saving. But my sister, the one who used to beg me for help with every broken-down car, stood on a stage at her party and laughed at me, calling me just an army mechanic in front of hundreds of her rich friends. They all laughed too. That night something inside me snapped. I had given her my support, my savings, my trust. $97,000 of it, and even the deed to the house she lived in. And this is how she repaid me. By dragging my name through the dirt for a cheap laugh. She thought I was powerless because I didn't wear a suit, because my hands smelled like oil instead of perfume. But she forgot something important. I still had the receipts. I had the paperwork, the proof, the control. So while she basked in shallow applause, I made a decision. I would take it all back. The money, the house, the dignity she tried to strip away. If she thought mocking me was entertainment, she was about to learn how quickly the joke can turn. I was never the kind of man people noticed first when I walked into a room. My sister Angela was that person. She always had a way of drawing every eye to her, laughing loudly, speaking with exaggerated gestures, dressing in bright colors that demanded attention. I was the opposite. Plain shirts, work boots, and hands that looked like they had been dipped in oil one too many times. It didn't matter to me. I was used to being in the background, used to being the one who fixed things quietly while others celebrated on the stage. Growing up, it was always clear that Angela was the favorite. Our parents adored her for her charm, her wit, and the way she made people smile. Teachers praised her confidence, neighbors gushed over her beauty, and relatives constantly talked about her bright future. Meanwhile, I was the one who mowed lawns, patched up the roof when it leaked, and made sure Mom's old Chevy ran smoothly enough to get her to church every Sunday. I didn't resent Angela back then. I just assumed we had different roles. She was meant to shine, and I was meant to hold everything together in the shadows. That's partly why I joined the army. It wasn't about the spotlight, it was about purpose. I wanted to serve, to feel like I was doing something bigger than myself. I never carried a rifle into combat, but my job mattered. As a mechanic, I made sure every Humvee, every tank, and every helicopter was safe enough to carry soldiers where they needed to go. Every bolt I tightened, every engine I rebuilt, meant lives saved. It was dirty, thankless work, but it gave me pride. I came home with grease under my fingernails and scars on my hands, but I also came home knowing I had done something important. Angela, of course, never understood. To her, my job was just fixing cars. She couldn't grasp the weight of it, couldn't imagine that behind every soldier charging into battle was a machine someone like me had spent sleepless nights repairing. She rolled her eyes when I tried to explain. "It's not like you're out there fighting," she would say dismissively, sipping her wine. "You're just turning wrenches." Those words used to sting, but I bit my tongue. I knew what my role was, even if she didn't. Over the years, Angela's life spiraled in ways that no one expected. She was beautiful, yes, but she was also reckless. She married a man who promised her the world, only for him to drain her bank account and leave her with 2 kids and a mountain of debt. Her business ventures, a boutique clothing shop, then a small cafe, all ended the same way, with bills piling higher than profits. She had a gift for spending but not for managing. And every time she stumbled, she came to me. "Please, I just need a little help until things settle down," she would say, her eyes wide, her voice trembling with desperation. Could never say no. I dipped into my savings more times than I could count. I helped pay her rent when her ex stopped sending child support. I sent her money for groceries, for school supplies, for emergencies both real and exaggerated. The biggest blow came when she begged me for a large sum, $97,000. She said it was her last chance to clear her debts, to start fresh for her kids. I wired it without hesitation. It was nearly everything I had set aside after years of working long shifts and deployments. Later, when she faced losing her home, I signed over one of my rental properties to her. She cried and hugged me, swearing she would never forget what I had done for her. And maybe in that moment she meant it. But promises are fragile things in Angela's world, easily broken when they become inconvenient. I didn't mind the sacrifices at first. That's what family does, right? We catch each other when we fall. I told myself I was strong enough to carry her burdens, that I didn't need recognition or thanks. I kept fixing engines by day and patching up Angela's life by night. And for a while I believed it was enough. But cracks started to form. It was in the little things, the way she would boast about her independence at family gatherings, never once acknowledging the money I had sent. Or the way she'd laugh about her amazing new house, without mentioning that it was mine she lived in. She acted like her successes were her own doing, while her failures were always someone else's fault. I brushed it off. Let her have her pride, I thought. I didn't need the world to know the truth. Still, a part of me couldn't ignore the imbalance. I was the one who skipped vacations, who drove a beat-up truck instead of buying a new car, who lived simply so I could keep supporting her. And while I sacrificed, Angela lived like every day was a celebration. She threw parties, bought designer clothes, traveled with friends, all while insisting she was struggling. It gnawed at me quietly, like a slow leak in a tire you don't notice until it's too late. The turning point came on her birthday. She invited me to a grand party at her house. My house, filled with her wealthy friends, people I had never met. I showed up in my usual plain clothes, feeling out of place among the tailored suits and sparkling dresses. I told myself I was there for her, that it didn't matter if I blended in. But I didn't know that night would change everything. Angela loved being the center of attention, and after a few glasses of champagne, she took the microphone. She began thanking her friends for being there, cracking jokes, basking in the laughter. Then, with a sly grin, she turned toward me. "And here's my brother," she announced loudly. "The army mechanic. You know, the grease monkey who keeps trucks running. Isn't it cute?" The crowd erupted in laughter. Some clapped, others whispered. I stood frozen, my face burning hot, while Angela smirked, enjoying the moment. It wasn't just the words. It was the mockery in her tone, the way she reduced years of service and sacrifice into a cheap joke. My heart pounded, but I forced a smile, pretending it didn't matter. I stayed until I couldn't anymore, slipping out quietly while the laughter still echoed in my ears. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. The image replayed again and again. Angela, glass in hand, mocking me in front of strangers while standing in the house I had given her, living on the money I had worked myself raw to earn. It wasn't just disrespect. It was betrayal. And for the first time in my life, I stopped feeling like her protector. Instead, I started feeling like her fool. I stared at the ceiling for hours, my fists clenching and unclenching. My mind kept going back to the documents tucked away in my desk, the proof of the money I had sent, the deed to the house that still bore my name. Angela thought I was powerless, that I would always stay in the shadows fixing things for her. But she was wrong. I had been quiet for too long. And in that silence, she had mistaken my kindness for weakness. Something inside me shifted that night. I didn't make a decision right away, but I knew change was coming. I was done being the joke. I was done being invisible. Angela had mocked the wrong man, and soon she would understand exactly what that meant. The morning after Angela's birthday party, I woke up with a heaviness I couldn't shake. My body felt like it had been weighted down, my chest tight as though someone was sitting on it. I got up, went into the bathroom, and stared at myself in the mirror. My reflection looked tired, older than my years. The bags under my eyes were darker, and the faint lines on my forehead seemed deeper. My hands, calloused, scarred, and stained faintly with oil that never seemed to wash away, were steady, but my heart was not. I couldn't stop hearing her voice in my head, mocking me with that smirk on her face, her words slicing through me sharper than any blade. "Just an army mechanic." I whispered it out loud, testing how it sounded in the empty room. The bitterness in my tone surprised even me. I had never minded being in the shadows before. My role was never about glory. But Angela hadn't just made a joke. She had stripped my dignity bare in front of people who didn't know me, reducing decades of sacrifice into something small and laughable. And worse, she did it while standing in the house I had given her, wearing a dress probably bought with the very money I'd loaned her. It wasn't a joke. It was betrayal. I tried to distract myself that day, throwing myself into work at the garage. The familiar rhythm of turning wrenches, tightening bolts, and testing engines usually soothed me, but not this time. Every sound reminded me of her words. The clatter of a dropped tool felt like laughter. The hiss of air escaping a tire felt like whispers behind my back. For the first time in years, I felt ashamed of the work I loved. I had built my pride on these greasy hands, and Angela had turned them into a punchline. That night I couldn't eat. I sat at my kitchen table with papers spread out in front of me. Bills, old bank statements, and at the bottom of the stack, a folder I hadn't opened in years. Inside were the receipts of every transfer I had made to Angela. Month after month of money wired. Thousands upon thousands until the final blow. The $97,000 that nearly wiped out my savings. Alongside the statements was a copy of the property deed, the one I had signed over to her with the assurance that, it's just temporary. My name was still there. Legally, the house was still mine. I ran my hand over the documents slowly, a storm building in my chest. For years I had treated these papers like they were just numbers, just formalities. But now they felt like weapons, like the proof of a truth Angela had tried to bury. She had taken and taken from me, and in return she gave me humiliation. She thought I was weak, but these papers told a different story. I wasn't powerless. I had simply been patient. Sleep eluded me again that night. Instead, I sat on the couch, replaying memories I had pushed aside for too long. I remembered the first time I gave her money, back when she was still married. She had called me crying, saying her husband had spent the rent money on gambling. I drove over that same night, handed her an envelope of cash, and told her everything would be okay. She hugged me, promising she would pay me back soon. Course she never did. Then came the failed clothing boutique. She convinced me it would be her big break. I didn't believe in the business, but I believed in her. So I emptied part of my savings account to keep it alive. The shop closed within 6 months. Again, promises faded into silence. And then the house. That was supposed to be her fresh start, a safe place for her and the kids. I had signed the deed over to her because she insisted banks wouldn't approve her a loan. Just until I rebuild my credit, she said. That was nearly 4 years ago. Not once did she mention giving it back. All those sacrifices, all those second chances, played in my mind like a cruel montage, leading to that one moment at the party when she laughed at me. My blood boiled. Something inside me hardened that night. The next morning I made a decision. I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. For once in my life, I would put myself first. It wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about respect. I had spent my life giving, but respect isn't something you can buy for others. Something they have to give freely. And Angela had thrown mine away. I started small. I called my lawyer, an old friend named Mark who had handled my property paperwork in the past. I asked him what it would take to reclaim the house and whether I had legal grounds to recover the money. His voice was calm, almost clinical, but his words lit a fire in me. You have every right, he said. She never bought the house. It's still in your name. As for the money, if you have records of the transfers, we can build a case. Hearing that felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater too long. For the first time I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. I wasn't trapped. I wasn't powerless. I had been holding the key all along. But then came the doubt. Late at night when the house was quiet, I asked myself hard questions. Was I really ready to do this? To take back everything from my own sister? What about her kids? They had nothing to do with her selfishness. Would I be punishing them too? Those thoughts gnawed at me, threatening to weaken my resolve. I remembered one night years earlier when her youngest had crawled onto my lap, calling me the best uncle in the world. He didn't know his mom was drowning in debt, or that the roof over his head wasn't really hers. He just knew that I was there, The thought of hurting them made my stomach twist. But then Angela's mocking voice returned, clear as day. Just an army mechanic. And just like that, the doubt burned away. It wasn't the kids who had mocked me. It wasn't the kids who had taken advantage of me year after year. It was Angela. And if she truly cared about them, she wouldn't have jeopardized their stability by humiliating the very man who kept them safe. That week, I began gathering everything I needed. Every bank statement, every email exchange, every signed agreement. I organized it meticulously, line by line, dollar by dollar. Each page felt like another brick in the wall I was finally building between myself and Angela's manipulation. Angela, of course, was oblivious. She called me 2 days later, chirping happily about how amazing her party had been. "Did you see how many people came?" she asked. "I think it was the best one I've thrown yet." I listened silently, gripping the phone tighter with every word. She didn't mention the way she mocked me, didn't acknowledge the sting of her words. To her, it was as though nothing had happened. That was the moment I knew she would never change. After the call, I sat down and wrote a simple sentence on a piece of paper. Enough is enough. I pinned it above my desk where I could see it every day. Became my reminder, my anchor. I had been silent for too long, but silence had turned me into a joke in her eyes. Now it was time to let the truth speak louder than any joke she could ever tell. That was the breaking point. I wasn't sure what the road ahead would look like, but one thing was certain. Angela was about to discover that her army mechanic brother wasn't someone to laugh at. He was someone to reckon with. The first letter went out on a Tuesday morning. It was simple, direct, and written in the cold, professional tone only lawyers know how to master. My lawyer, Mark, had drafted it with precision. The letter notified Angela that the house she was living in was still legally under my name, and that I was exercising my right to reclaim full ownership. It also mentioned the possibility of recovering the money I had transferred to her. A polite warning dressed in formal language. I remember reading it over before Mark sent it out. There was nothing emotional about it, nothing personal. It was just business. But to me it was more than that. It was the first strike, the moment I stopped being the quiet brother who fixed things in the background and became someone who demanded what was his. For the next few days I waited for her call. I knew Angela well enough to predict her reactions. At first she'd laugh it off, certain it was some misunderstanding. Then when she realized I was serious, she'd get angry, accusing me of betrayal. After that she would beg, pulling out every trick in her book. I was ready for all of it. The call came sooner than I expected. On Thursday evening my phone lit up with her name. I hesitated before answering, bracing myself. "What the hell is this?" she snapped the moment I picked up. "I got a letter saying you're taking the house back. Is this some kind of sick joke?" I kept my voice calm, almost too calm. "It's not a joke, Angela. The house is in my name. Always has been. I'm just reclaiming what's mine." Her voice shot up an octave. "Reclaiming? You gave it to me. You said it was mine. I said you could live there until you got back on your feet. That was 4 years ago. You're not on your feet, you're stomping on mine." There was silence for a moment, and then she laughed, but it wasn't the carefree laugh she used at parties. It was sharp, bitter, almost desperate. "You've lost your mind. You're really going to throw your own sister and her kids out on the street. Do you know how that makes you look?" Clenched my jaw. "Do you know how it looked when you mocked me in front of your friends? When you made my service, my sacrifices, into a joke while standing in the house I paid for?" Her silence this time was heavier. I could almost hear her scrambling for a response. Finally she sighed dramatically. "It was just a joke, come on. You're too sensitive. Don't ruin everything over a stupid joke." But it wasn't just a joke. It was years of taking, years of being invisible, years of being treated like I was only good for what I could provide. "It's already ruined, Angela," I said quietly. "And I'm done." She hung up on me. I expected that. What I didn't expect was how quickly the fallout began. By the weekend, word had spread through the family. My phone buzzed with messages from cousins, aunts, and even our mother. Most were cautious, asking if it was true, if I had really sent a lawyer after Angela. Some were angry, accusing me of being cruel. But for once, I didn't bend under the weight of their words. I told them the truth. I had supported her for years, given her money, given her a home, and in return she humiliated me. The house and the money were mine, and I was finally taking them back. Not everyone believed me at first. Angela was good at spinning stories, painting herself as the victim. She cried to anyone who would listen, saying I was heartless, that I didn't care about her kids, that I was punishing her for being more successful. I almost laughed when I heard that. More successful when her success had been built on my back. But I didn't waste energy defending myself to everyone. I had the receipts, the documents, the proof. The truth didn't need to be shouted. It would speak for itself. Meanwhile, Mark filed the necessary paperwork to start the process of reclaiming the house legally. He explained that it might take weeks, maybe months, but the law was clear. The house was mine. Angela could delay, she could make noise, but she couldn't change the facts. Still, I knew Angela wouldn't go down quietly. And she didn't. Within days, she showed up at my place unannounced. I opened the door to find her standing there. Her face pale but her eyes blazing. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me before I could answer. She paced around my living room like a caged animal. Her voice sharp with anger. "Do you even realize what you're doing? You're destroying this family. Mom is furious, the kids are confused, and everyone thinks you've lost your mind. For what? Because I made a joke." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "It's not just about the joke. It's about everything. The money, the house, the way you've treated me like I'm nothing. I've given you everything I had, Angela. And you used me. Over and over again." Her face softened for a split second, but then she scoffed. "Oh please. You act like you're some saint. You wanted to help. Nobody forced you. Don't turn this around like I tricked you." Her words cut deeper than I expected. Maybe on some level she was right. I had wanted to help. I had chosen to give. But helping and being exploited are not the same thing. And Angela had crossed that line years ago. "You're right," I admitted quietly. "I did want to help. But now I want my life back. I want my dignity back. And I want my house back." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. Finally, she shook her head in disbelief. "You'll regret this. You think you're standing up for yourself, but all you're doing is tearing us apart." And then she stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. After she left, I sat down heavily, my hands trembling. It wasn't easy standing up to her. For years, I had been conditioned to fold, to give in, to play the quiet role. But this time was different. This time I had drawn a line, and I wasn't stepping back. Over the next week, Angela tried every tactic in her arsenal. She called crying, begging me to stop. She called furious, threatening to cut me off from the family forever. She even tried sending mutual friends to talk sense into me. But I didn't waver. Each time I repeated the same thing. The house and the money were mine, and I was taking them back. It wasn't about greed. It wasn't even about revenge, though part of me savored the thought of her realizing she couldn't control me anymore. It was about something deeper, a reclaiming of my worth, my place, my voice. For too long, I had allowed Angela to define me. I had let her treat me like a tool, useful only when she needed something. Now, for the first time, I was defining myself. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sun sink below the horizon, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The battle was just beginning, but inside me, something had already shifted. I wasn't the silent mechanic anymore. I wasn't just the brother in the shadows. I was the man who finally stood up. Angela had fired her shot when she mocked me in front of her friends, but this was my first strike. And she was about to learn that I wasn't just a mechanic. I was someone who knew how to rebuild, even if that meant tearing down everything first. The legal process took time, but time was something Angela no longer had in her favor. Within weeks, the papers were filed in court, and the official notices arrived at her door. She couldn't ignore them anymore. The same woman who had laughed me off on the phone, who had told me I was too sensitive, was now facing eviction from a house she had treated as her castle. At first, she fought back in her usual way, with charm. She tried to smooth things over, calling me with a voice dripping in sweetness, pretending as though nothing had really happened. "We don't have to go through with all this," she said one evening. "Come on, you know how stressful my life has been. I said some things I shouldn't have, but we're family. We can work this out." But I had heard those lines too many times before. Each apology was just a stepping stone to another request, another excuse. I stayed firm. "This isn't about what you said, Angela," I told her. "This is about what you've done year after year. I gave you more than anyone ever would. And you mock me for it. I'm done being used." Her tone shifted instantly. The sweetness curdled into venom. "You're pathetic," she spat. "Do you think anyone will respect you after this? You're taking everything from your own sister. People are laughing at you, not me." But deep down I think she already knew the opposite was true. For the first time people weren't laughing at me, they were whispering about her. The cracks in Angela's perfect image started to show almost immediately. Her so-called friends, the same ones who had laughed along at her party, began to distance themselves once they realized she was losing her house. The invitations stopped. The smiles turned into polite nods from across the room. She had built her identity around wealth and charm, and without a house to showcase or money to flaunt, she became less interesting. People like Angela thrived on appearances, and the moment those appearances slipped, the foundation crumbled. I heard from a cousin that Angela had been ranting at a family gathering, claiming I had tricked her into signing the deed that I had stolen from her. But others weren't so quick to believe her anymore. Too many people had seen how often she leaned on me, how many times I had bailed her out. For years they turned a blind eye, maybe because it was easier to let me shoulder the weight. But now, with the truth spilling out, the sympathy she expected wasn't there. Even our mother, who had always defended Angela, began to waver. She called me late one night, her voice quieter than usual. "Is it true?" she asked. "Did you really pay for the house? Did you give her all that money?" "Yes, Mom," I said softly. "Every penny." And I kept quiet because I didn't want anyone to think less of her. But she crossed the line. There was a long pause on the other end. Finally, Mom sighed. "I don't agree with how you're doing this, but maybe it's time she faced the truth." That was the first time in my life I felt like she saw me, not just as the older son who could fix everything, but as a man who deserved respect. Meanwhile, Angela's desperation grew. She tried stalling the court proceedings, filing responses that claimed the house was a gift. But the documents didn't lie. My name was still on the deed. Every argument she made unraveled under the weight of simple facts. Mark, calm as ever, handled it all with the kind of efficiency I admired. He told me not to worry, that it was only a matter of time. But Angela didn't just fight in court, she fought in the shadows too. She tried calling my boss at the garage, spreading rumors that I was unstable, hoping it might shake me. She messaged relatives late at night, saying I had turned cold, that I was abandoning family values. She even dragged her children into it, telling them I was trying to take their home away. That part cut me deepest. They were innocent, and I never wanted them to be caught in the crossfire. But Angela, in her desperation, used them like shields. The guilt gnawed at me, I won't lie. There were nights I lay awake, wondering if I had gone too far, if reclaiming the house meant punishing the wrong people. But every time those doubts crept in, I reminded myself of the years I had sacrificed, the dignity I had lost. This wasn't about punishing anyone. It was about reclaiming what was mine, what I had earned through sweat, long nights, and years of service. The turning point came during the first court hearing. Angela walked in dressed to impress, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, trying to play the role of the wronged sister. She spoke with dramatic pauses, emphasizing every word, trying to sway the judge with emotion. But then Mark presented the documents. The bank transfers, the property deed, the emails where she acknowledged borrowing money. The room grew quiet as the truth unfolded on paper, undeniable and clear. I didn't look at her while the evidence was read aloud. I didn't need to. I could feel her unraveling beside me, her confidence crumbling piece by piece. For once, I wasn't the one under the spotlight. She was. And this time, the laughter wasn't there to save her. After the hearing, she stormed out without a word. But I caught a glimpse of her face before she left. Pale, shaken, and for the first time, stripped of the arrogance she wore like armor. The days that followed were quieter. She still sent me angry texts, still tried to rally sympathy from anyone who would listen, but the fight in her was weaker. Her friends had drifted away, her charm was fading, and the court's decision loomed over her like a shadow she couldn't escape. One evening I drove past the house, my house, and saw her sitting on the porch alone. No party, no friends, no glass of champagne in hand. Just Angela, staring into the distance, her shoulders slumped. Struck me then how much had changed. For years she had towered over me, larger than life, untouchable. But now she looked small, human, vulnerable in a way I had never seen. Part of me wanted to stop, to sit beside her, to remind her that despite everything, I was still her brother. But I didn't. Because another part of me knew that Angela wasn't ready for that yet. She hadn't learned the lesson, not fully. She still saw herself as the victim, still believed she could charm or bully her way out of the consequences. Until she faced the reality she had created, there was nothing I could do. That night as I drove home, I realized something important. This fight wasn't just about money or a house. It was about balance. For too long, Angela had taken and I had given. For too long, she had shown while I stayed in the shadows. Now the scales were tipping, and though it wasn't easy, it was necessary. Angela's crown, the one she wore so proudly, built on illusions and borrowed wealth, was cracking. Piece by piece, the facade was falling away. And soon, she would have to stand before the world without it. And when that day came, I would be ready. The final court date came on a gray Thursday morning, the kind where the sky looked heavy, as though even the clouds carried the weight of unfinished business. I sat quietly in the wooden bench, hands folded, heart steady but heavy with anticipation. Months of filings, hearings, and arguments had led to this moment. On the other side of the aisle, Angela sat with her attorney, dressed in a sharp suit, but no matter how carefully she styled her hair or painted her lips, the wear was showing. The sparkle she once carried effortlessly had dimmed. She looked tired, her eyes swollen from sleepless nights. The judge entered, and the courtroom hushed. It all began with the routine formalities, but every word felt like a hammer against the walls of the life Angela had built on illusions. Her lawyer tried one last time to argue that the house was a gift, a gesture from an older brother who had always supported his sister. But Mark, calm and precise, laid out every piece of evidence. He spoke of the bank transfers, the agreements, the emails, and finally the deed that still bore my name. He didn't dramatize or embellish. He didn't need to. The facts were strong enough to stand on their own. When the judge delivered the decision, it felt less like a gavel striking and more like a chapter slamming shut. The house was legally mine. The financial repayments were ordered, totaling nearly the $97,000 I had given her over the years. Angela's objections melted away into silence, her face pale as if all the color had drained out of her world. I didn't feel triumph. Not in the way she might have if the roles were reversed. Instead, I felt a strange calm, like the final note of a long, discordant song finally resolving into quiet. Outside the courthouse, Angela cornered me. Her voice shook with desperation more than anger this time. "You don't understand what you've done," she said, her eyes glistening. "You've ruined me. Have nothing left. How could you do this to your own sister?" I met her gaze, and for the first time I didn't flinch. "Angela, I didn't ruin you," I said. "You ruined yourself. All I did was stop carrying the weight of your choices." She opened her mouth to lash back, but the words caught in her throat. For once, there was no comeback, no clever insult, no charming deflection. She just stood there, trembling before finally turning away. The weeks that followed were difficult, not because I doubted my decision, but because endings are never as clean as we wish them to be. Angela moved out of the house in pieces. At first, she fought the eviction order, but eventually she realized it was futile. I drove by one day and saw her loading boxes into a friend's car. Her once pristine image reduced to a woman packing her life into cardboard. Her friends were few, her circle smaller, the glitter gone. When I finally stepped back into the house after it was legally mine again, I felt a strange mix of pride and sorrow. The walls carried memories, both good and bad, but now they were mine to reclaim. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was proof that I hadn't been invisible, that my sacrifices hadn't been wasted. Every room, every nail, every brick was a reminder that I had built something real, something lasting, even when others tried to erase me. Family gatherings were awkward in the months that followed. Angela often skipped them, but when she did show up, she was quieter, subdued. Gone were the flashy outfits, the grand stories about her success, the subtle digs at me. She sat on the sidelines, almost like a shadow of herself. I won't lie, part of me pitied her. But another part of me knew this was the only way she could learn. For once, she had to sit with the consequences of her actions. Our mother, though, surprised me most. She began to call more often, not just to check in on the situation, but to ask about me. Really ask. How was work at the garage? Was I eating well? Did I need anything? It was as though she finally saw me, not just as the dependable one who would always be there, but as someone worthy of care too. That shift alone was worth more than any house or check. As for me, life returned to its rhythm, but it wasn't the same rhythm as before. Something inside me had changed. I walked a little taller, spoke with more certainty, and carried myself with a quiet confidence. People at work noticed, friends noticed, even strangers seemed to treat me differently. When you stop letting yourself be diminished, the world responds in kind. One evening, months after it was all over, I sat on the porch of the house, the same porch where I had once seen Angela slumped in defeat. The sun dipped low in the sky, painting the clouds in shades of gold and purple. I thought about the long road that had brought me here, the years of sacrifice, the humiliation at her party, the courage it had taken to finally draw the line. And I realized something. This wasn't a story about revenge. It was a story about reclamation. About taking back not just money or property but dignity, respect, and identity. Angela had mocked me as the army mechanic, trying to reduce me to a title, a stereotype. But what she didn't understand was that being a mechanic wasn't an insult. It was a badge of honor. I had built, fixed, and carried more than she could ever understand. And now, I had finally fixed the one thing that had been broken the longest. The balance between us. I didn't hate Angela. I didn't wish her misery. But I also didn't pity her anymore. She had choices, and she would have to live with them. As for me, I had choices too. Choices that finally centered my worth, my life, my future. The night grew darker, and I turned on the porch light. The warm glow spilled across the steps, a small reminder that this house, this life was mine again. Not because it was given to me, not because I demanded it, but because I earned it. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't known I was missing. And with that peace, I finally closed the door on Angela's shadow, and opened it to whatever came next. Sparkles, if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Sparkles, subscribe to Twisted Fate Chronicle for more powerful stories that will keep you hooked.